Today I'm going to be making the Wednesday Cheekies View B in size extra small. This is Emerald Erin's pattern, and if you go on to the pattern, you can see for the size I'm making, I have to print out pages 5 to 6. And tomorrow I'll be making two versions of View A. I'm going to make the lace trim version, but I'm also going to hack the pattern to use picot elastic around the whole thing. And I'm going to be doing an overlay, a lace overlay on the front as well. So as she says in her instructions, you do need to print off the pattern at 100%. So a quick little tutorial here on printing. I'm going to go into print under file. And then I'm going to make sure my double-sided is off. Where it says pages, I'm going to go into range, and I know I need to print pages 5 to 6, so I'm just going to change this to 6. So now I'm only printing those pages. This is where it's important. When you go further down your print schedule, you'll see scale, and I want it at 100%. And then I'm going to I want to make 2 copies of this. So I'm going to go 2. I haven't made these before, so I may adjust the pattern slightly once I've made my first pair to see how it is, to see if I want more coverage or less coverage. So that's how you print the pattern, and then I will be going into the next steps. So I've printed off my pattern. The next step is just to double check that you actually have printed at 100%. So this box here should be 5 centimeters both ways. You can check, and it definitely is. So now I'm going to cut out my pattern and paste it together. I should have added, if you're new to printing off patterns, each pattern will have a diamond shape or some similar thing, and you match it up. So this is a B and this is a B, so you match it up and you just tape in the lines here. Sorry, I omitted that. And tomorrow, I will be projecting my pattern. So if you're new to projection, I will show you how to use Pattern Projector to use your projector. If you're new to sewing underwear, the design of this may look a little not intuitive. So these are a low rise, a mid-low rise panty. If you want your panty higher up, in other words, you want more coverage, take a close look at the pattern. This is half of your crotch seam. This is your center front, this is your leg, and this is the forward side seam that you see. Let me bring it up here. That's your, sorry, I'm not a professional camera person. This is your forward side seam. This is that half crotch right here. And this is your center front seam right here. So if you want, you can make these taller by simply extending this up. You'll get a bit more coverage, and then just drawing it over. So before you cut it out, if you think this is going to be a little bit too low for you, you can always extend it up a bit, a few centimeters, a few inches, whatever you want. And then do a toile and see if it fits. But that's what you can do if you want it to be a little more coverage. And you would do the same thing on the back piece. You would extend, this is the center back, this is the leg, this is your side seam or your forward side seam, and this is your crotch. So you would extend this up a bit and just bring it over and extend this up a bit as well, if you want more coverage. And I very well may do that. I haven't made these before. I'm not quite sure how they're gonna lie on me. But that you could do right away if you think these are going to be a little bit too low. So I just wanted to point out on the pattern what's what, because when you first look at it, it can be a little bit confusing for people who haven't made panties before. So that just gives you a general overview. Also, I forgot to note that these are for stretch fabrics. I think the pattern calls for 40%. Yeah, the pattern calls for 40% stretch, and I will go over that right now as well. So if you have some fabric so to figure out the stretch of a pattern, the easiest thing to do is draw a straight line, and I work in metric, so I drew out 10 centimeters. I think that's 4 inches. And then every centimeter, just draw out, and for each centimeter you add 10%. So you can download these charts on the internet. There's all kinds. Megan Nielsen Patterns has a good stretch chart. So I'm going to take my fabric, in this case we're working with lace, and I'm going to line it up to the 0 and to the 10%. And if I can stretch it to number 4, then I know the fabric has 40% stretch. And if it bounces back and recovers really well, that is perfect underwear fabric. So this lace would be excellent for this. I can stretch it very nicely without like going crazy stretching to the 40% mark. Actually, it has more like 50% stretch. So that's how you figure out the stretch percentage of a fabric. And then I have a lining fabric here, and I can do the same thing. So I can set it up to 0 and set it to my 10 centimeter mark. And this stuff stretches actually 100% and then recovers. So this I use for, I actually use this for underwear as well, because it's so stretchy and so thin and so breathable. You can see right through it, and strong. It's made from nylon. So I use this all the time. Anyways, let's continue on. Another quick tip, if you're not sure about how high you want the underwear, this is my front piece. You can always just hold it up to yourself and see how high it goes on you, and then figure out if you want to raise the center front and this side seam up a bit or lower it. And of note, for this underwear, all seam allowances are 0.6 millimeters or 1/4 inch seam allowance. She has that marked here. This is the cut line. This is the sewing line here. Also, before you start, please make note of the notches. Notches are important. You have your double notches are always at the back, and you have your single notch is always at the front. And these up here are pin marks where she wants you to pin the elastic. So here I have my stretch lace, and whenever you're working with lingerie patterns, you want the greatest stretch to go around your body horizontally, not up and down. So as you can see, my lace stretches this way. Your lace should be right side up, and you're going to take your back view and you're going to align the straight edge to the lowest part of the scallops. So you can see here it's high, medium, right here is low. I want all that showing on my underwear. That's the pretty part. So I'm going to look at this, and I want to try to get this flower in this one and this one. So I'm going to line all that up just like this to the lowest part. I don't want to go over. I want the whole edge to show. And I'm going to cut that out. You'll note that the pattern is bigger width than what my lace is, so I may end up cutting down my pattern just slightly. I can do that at the very end when I'm about to put elastic in. I'm not too worried about that right now. So that's the back. I'm gonna do the same thing with the front. I'm aligning everything up just like that, and I will be cutting that out. And then my crotch piece, I was hoping to fit right there, but I can't. So my crotch piece I'm going to be putting right here. So once that is done, I'm going to cut out each piece, and then I'll show you how to mirror those pieces because we need to cut out 2 of each, just 1 of the gusset, 2 of each. So I'm just going to take my rotary cutter. Don't cut that edge. Don't get confused. So we're cutting. So I'll be back once I cut this out. Of note for me personally, with size extra small, it takes me 62 centimeters. So now we'll do the second set of cutting, and I'm going to take my front view, and this is it right here. And what I'm going to do is flip it wrong side up, and I'm going to match the pattern. So I have a flower here and a flower right here. I'm going to put them exactly on top of each other and line up all the scallops and everything so that they're exactly matching. You can see that. And then I'm just going to cut it out using the lace as the pattern now. Same thing with the back piece. I've got my lace right side up, and I'm putting my back piece right side to right side, and I'm lining up my scallops exactly, because you want a mirror image so it looks symmetrical on your body. So if you have a flower on one side of your belly button, you want a flower on the other side of your belly button, that type of thing. So you can see that's exactly lined up. Now I'll cut it out. And the lining, you do need 1 piece in lace and then a liner of some sort. It's great if it's cotton or breathable material. And make sure to put your notch. I couldn't put a notch on my dark lace. I don't have a white marker, so I just used a pin to mark my notch there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out my other pieces, and then I'll be back. Of note for me personally, with size extra small, it takes me 62 centimeters. As a little aside, if you have incontinence issues or period issues, I like to add 1 inch or 1.5 inch layer in between my crotch pieces. So I cut 2 linings, and I sew a small piece of Zorb, that's Z-O-R-B, onto my liner, and then I just baste another liner on top, and then I use it as one. That just gives a little more protection for those who might want it. So you can see what I've done here. You can use just an extra strip of cotton, whatever you want, but what I've done is I've sewn that onto my liner, and then I've basted the whole thing together around all the edges. And because this is going to be on top like this, you won't even see it. It's going to be covered by the lace. But I like to include that in all my underwear. So now we're ready with step 1, which is sewing your crotch sides together. So right side to right side. This is the right side of my liner, and this is the right side of my lace. I'm going to be putting them on top of each other, marking my notches, and then I'm going to do sew the side seams together, either with a zigzag or a serger. I am using my sewing machine because my serger does not have purple thread in it, and with this type of underwear you'll see that. So we're going to sew the sides of the crotch together. With sewing lingerie, one tip is that it's very difficult for your sewing machine to handle starting on an edge with thin fabrics like lace. So you have 2 or 3 options. The first option, which is what I do, is I start a few centimeters in. You can see that my edge of my fabric is here, right here, but I'm starting about 1.5 centimeters in, and I'm going to zigzag to the end, and then I'm going to turn it around and just sew that little bit. That way the thin fabric doesn't get sucked down the feed dogs and you get a mess. The other option you can do is take a piece of paper and put it underneath everything. Put it underneath the fabric, and then your machine will start no problem. So, and that works. You just tear the paper off after. I just prefer not to do that. So I highly suggest starting a little bit in and then flipping the thing over and finishing that last little bit. So I'm going to sew this now. So I did this in a light thread so you can see. So you can see I have not started at the edge. I've started in, I've zigzagged to the end, and now I'm going to go back to my machine and just do this little bit. And that's how you avoid your thin fabrics getting sucked down your feed dogs. Another tip I have for sewing with thin fabrics, difficult fabrics, is if your machine has a knot feature where you don't have to reverse, is don't reverse, use your knot feature. Or again, kind of like starting in, reverse about 1 centimeter before the edge and then just finish sewing. That helps a lot. And worth its weight in gold is this walking foot. I 100% recommend spending the money to get a walking foot if you want to sew elastics, athletic wear, anything with stretch fabrics. Get a walking foot. It will save you so much hassle and headache. It just helps the fabric, both sets of fabric, the bottom and the top fabric, glide through the machine much easier. So you can see we have sewn the side edges, and now the next step is just to flip this around. And our crotch piece is done. And don't be neurotic about, you know, having the seams like completely even. You can see I kind of missed getting the edges lined up. That's okay. It's all going to work out. So flip it right side out. This is going to be the inside of the panty. Obviously, this is the outside. Let's go to the next step. So the next step is taking your back piece, and we're going to be sewing this center back right here. So we're going to do right sides together and be sewing this at a 6 millimeters with a zigzag stitch. So put your pieces together. Make sure you got the crotch at the crotch. The crotch is the longer one, not that one. So right sides together. We're just going to, I'm just going to pin these cross pieces together just to keep them together. And you're going to match up your notches on my lace. I'm sure you can't see it on camera because I don't have a good marker for dark lace. So we're going to sew up this edge here with a zigzag stitch. Here's your lace scallops, this is your crotch, and this is your forward side seam. So let's sew up the center back seam. So you can see I've zigzagged that seam. It's totally fine just to use a zigzag. And then once you lay it out, you can see that it's pretty much symmetrical. I probably could have did a bit of a better job, but the flowers are pretty symmetrical. You can, if you're really neurotic and you really want it perfect, you can, when you're doing this, you can just baste it by hand first to make sure the lace stays exactly where you want it. I'm doing this quickly, so I'm not doing that. So let's go to the front. We're going to be sewing up our center front seam. When you look at your lace, it's not the scallop, that's the leg. It's this one right here, this seam right here with the notch. So right sides to right sides, the exact same as last time. And we'll put those together, line up your notches. And we'll be sewing from here to here at 6 millimeters. I actually go in a little bit more than 6 millimeters because it's easier for my machine to sew that with a zigzag stitch. I'll be right back. I didn't show that pinned up, but we'll be sewing from here to here. So here is my front sewn up. And now I'm going to pause because I'm actually going to add a lining to this panty. I kind of think it will make it stronger. So I'm going to cut out the pieces again and add a lining. So because I decided to add a lining last minute, one thing to be aware of with this pattern is that you want the greatest stretch to be going around your body. So you want to cut out your lining with the center front and the center back seam. Use that as your guide. And so my greatest stretch is going to be going this way. That's the way you want it. So lay out your fabric, figure out which way is the most stretchy, and then put your center front and your center back seam perpendicular to that. So your greatest stretch going this way. And for those super new to sewing, there are grain lines, of course. With stretch fabric, I do pay attention to that, but with super stretchy fabric like what I have, I just closely look at the fabric and look at the ribs, and then just match everything up. I don't get too concerned about it for a lining, for underwear, because it's not big pieces. If it was a dress or something like that, I'm way more concerned. If you want to line these underwear, and I kind of recommend it actually, especially for lace, it does reinforce the lace and make the underwear last longer. What you want to do for the center front is you want to put this on the fold. I'll actually mark that in for you so you remember. So on fold, and that way your lining doesn't have a center front seam, and it's quite comfortable, and it's not bulky. So you can see here's the fold of my fabric, and I'm lining that up. And same with the back, it doesn't need a center front seam. Oh, sorry, I can't do the back because of the curve. So this you have to cut 2 pieces. But for the front, you can definitely do a center cut on the fold. So if you're doing a lining, let's deal with that first. So here is the center front lining. I cut it on the fold, so it's 1 piece. What we don't want is the lining showing on the scallop edge. So you have 2 choices. You can trim down that edge by 1 centimeter, and then you can treat the pieces as one. So then you'll be basting the pieces together and then continuing on. Or I think a stronger option is to sew clear elastic along this edge on both sides, which is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to turn that clear elastic in to the inside. I'll show you what I mean. So to reinforce this edge, I'm going to zigzag a thin piece of elastic on both sides, and I'm just going to turn it to the inside and then stitch it down. So it's neat, you don't see it, it's going to be on the inside of the panty, and it will just look nice from the front and from the inside. So you can see I've sewn clear elastic along the scallop edge of the liner, and I always leave tails of elastic because it's easier for your sewing machine to grab it. I'm going to do the exact same thing. Oh, I need to sew that little bit of a seam. See, I didn't flip it over. I'll do that. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the back. I'm going to sew the center back seam, and then along the scallop edge, I'm going to sew elastic, and then I'll be back. So I've changed my mind with the back piece. What I want to do first, before sewing this center back seam, is I want to add the elastic to the laces, and then I'm going to show you a method of applying the lining to the back and enclosing all the seams in one seam. So first, if you want to apply your elastic, if you don't want to, skip it and go to the next step. So again, my quick tip is when you're applying elastic or working with harder fabrics, is I start it in the middle and I zigzag that side, and now I'm going to start in the middle and zigzag to the other end. And that just really helps with the sewing, and it helps your machine get through the fabric. And I've actually done it with the center back seam pinned, just to make sure I'm sewing on the right sides and what I need to do so it all works out. So the lining was totally optional, and there is a different way to do the lining that I can show next time. If you don't want to turn the edges over, you can sew the lining to the lace with the elastic a different way. So now what we have is we have our center back, right sides together, and I've already sewn this seam, but what you can do is just baste it together. Then we're going to take our lining pieces, and that's going to be, so if you're not adding a lining, you want to put your center backs together, right sides together, and zigzag this seam here. This is your crotch. This is the center back seam. So you can zigzag that at 1/4 of an inch. If you're adding a lining, you're going to have your main pieces right sides together. And then you're going to have your lining pieces as well, right sides together. So we're going to put one lining piece on. Remember, this is your crotch down here. So there's my first lining piece on, and it is right sides up. And then we're going to take our second lining piece, and again, this is going to be wrong sides up. So the lining pieces are right sides together, and the main pieces are right sides together. And then we're going to pin all 4 layers together. And if you want, you can baste the 2 layers together first and then put them all together, however you find it easiest to sew. Especially if you're working with hard to work with fabrics, I would baste at least the main fabrics together first. So what we're going to do is we're going to sew all 4 layers with a zigzag stitch at 6 millimeters. So this is what you should have, all 4 pieces sewn together along the center back seam. What you can do if you're a bit messy like me is you can trim this seam down. And I think next time I would adjust the pattern so that this is a 1 centimeter seam allowance. It makes it a little bit easier to sew, unless you're using a serger, of course. So I'm just going to trim this down and make it just slightly neater. I was a little messy there. You can use pinking shears for that too. And then what you're going to do is simply open it up. And you're going to see that your seam is enclosed, and you have a nice back. And there's the front. So the seam's enclosed, which is super nice and comfortable. And I actually find some laces are not very smooth and comfortable to wear. So adding a lining that's soft like this just makes the panty more comfortable. So now we have our crotch seam down here. What I'm going to do is baste this together first. It's not going to go to the edge. That's okay. Don't worry about the gap here. Just baste with a long straight stitch. Just baste this edge together because that's going to make it a lot easier to sew in the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and baste this rounded seam here. As another aside, this is a perfect example of how knit fabrics can get stretched out. That's why it's wavy. So to counteract that, you can change your tension. Also, what I could have done was stretched my elastic as I was sewing this lining down. So just be aware that this can happen. Once it's on my body, it's going to pull straight. I'm not overly concerned about it. It's just the lining, but I would adjust for that next time. So now I'm taking my front piece. It is wrong side up, and I'm taking my lining and I'm putting that wrong sides together. Sorry, this way. Wrong sides together. And what I'm going to do is just baste this. They're going to act as one. So I'm going to find the middle of each, and I'm going to baste it along the crotch, and I'm going to find the middle of each and baste it along the upper edge too. I'll make another tutorial in the future where all the seams are going to be encased, including the crotch seam. So I'll do that in the future, but for right now, I actually don't have the time to do that today. So we're going to continue on. I've basted my linings together to at the crotch seams of both. So now we're going to do right sides together. So we're going to take our crotch. The longer edge is the front, and the skinnier edge is the back, I believe. Let me look at this just to make sure I have it right. Yes, I believe the bigger edge here is the front and the smaller edge is the back. Yes. So this is our front, and we're going to take the longer edge and we're going to sew it to the crotch seam. So just let me make sure I have that correct. Yes. So you might have to do a little bit of fiddling here to line up the lace. So you might get a slight bit of gathering, but basically we want the scallop to be we want the edge of the scallop to match the edge of the mane. So I'm going to end up doing a little bit of stretching to make it fit, but that's okay. So what I've done is I've just used my little things. So I'm going to end up having to stretch this to make it fit. So I'm going to find the middle right there, and I'll put a pin in it. And there is going to be some puckering, not a big deal. It is going to flatten out. I have a pin in my mouth. It's going to flatten out on my body. I'm not worried about a bit of puckering. So when I sew it, I'm going to sew a straight stitch. I'm actually going to do a zigzag stitch right across, and I'm just going to make sure that these edges line up. And yeah, there's going to be a bit of puckering. That's okay. We're going to do a zigzag stitch there, or you can do a straight stitch. But yeah, so right sides together with all of those seams. So you can see I've lined up the crotch seam there, and this is what it looks like from the right side. You can see I really tried to get to the edge here, and if you have any overhang, you can just cut it off. And that's exactly what I'm going to do now, is I'm going to clean this seam up just a little bit so there's less bulk. And then we're going to sew it down one more time. We're going to top stitch it. So I'm just cutting that off just to make it nice and neat. And now we're going to fold it out, and we're going to top stitch to the panty side right along this seam edge here, nice and flat. So you want a matching thread, you don't want a different color thread. So we're going to top stitch right along here with a straight stitch, and that's going to make this seam lie flat against your body. So it's probably pretty hard for the camera to see, but there is a row of top stitching right here, and it makes the seam very flat. It's a little messy on the inside. Like I said, I'll try to do a tutorial where this is enclosed next time. But you can see like my extra absorbency layer is in the middle, and you can't even tell from the right side. So we're going to do the exact same process with the back. We're attaching it right sides together. So this is my crotch piece, this is my back piece. And again, we're going to do the same thing where we're slightly stretching the crotch to match the width of the back piece. So there's not like a huge overhang like that. And here I have my crotch right sides together to my back piece. I've pinned them in the middle. And what I'm going to do is start in the middle, sink my needle in, and then at the machine, I will be stretching this to fit on each side. So I'll sew this half, then I'll go back and I'll sew from here to here. So you can see my back crotch seam is sewn. And again, this can be a bit thick. So start in the middle, work your way out. Sew that, flip the piece around, start in the middle, work your way out. I find that is the easiest way to sew this. So this is what you should have. And now again, the same thing, we are going to top stitch this seam from the outside, flattening this seam. So go ahead and top stitch that. And as you can see, that is now top stitched. Now from the inside, it is flat. The reason I like a super thin lining is for this type of thing when there's a lot of seams that intersect. And if I had used a lilac color thread, this would look much neater. So now the crotch is finished, let's carry on. So if you don't have a lining, the next step is simply sewing the side seams together, right sides together, lining up the lace edges right here at a 6 millimeters, 1/4 inch. With the lining, I'm going to enclose those seams, so we're going to do things a little differently. So the next step is sewing the side seams right sides together. Do that with your main fashion fabric. So a straight stitch at 6 millimeters. And I'm going to show you another little tip I have for sewing with difficult fabrics on such a small little edge. So let me get this one together here. So we're doing right sides together. So I'm going to put them right sides together. And I'm going to put it in my machine. I'm going to start in the middle of the seam. And sorry, gotta get my pedal here with the camera in the way. It's kind of funny sometimes. And I'm going to sew with a straight stitch. I'm going to get to the end and I'm going to flip the whole thing around this way and then just go in the other direction. Oops, let me get this all straightened out here. And that makes it a lot easier. Sorry, this didn't flip as nicely as I wanted it to. I should have pinned it. Of course I didn't. So don't skip steps. Just pin that so it stays together. So I've sewn that. Now I'm just turning my work and pivoting. And now I'm sewing the rest of the seam. And I can pivot again to get the back stitch in. That's another way of dealing with tricky fabrics and tricky short little seams like this. So now this is essentially my reverse. And I'm done. And if your edges didn't quite match up, don't be afraid to unpick and start again. It's far easier to do that as you go rather than finish the whole thing and not be happy with the seam, because you'll always notice it. So basically with the side seam, you want to just make sure the scallops match up at the bottom. If you have an issue where they don't match up at the top like mine, we can always trim down the top later, but you can't trim down the scallops. So make sure the scallops match at your side seams. So your side seams should be sewn, and then we're going to take our lining seams, which is right here, and we're not going to sew them like that. We're actually just going to flip them. So just, there's the right side, flip it over, flip this over so they're right sides together, and then sew them. So if you've done that, the seam should be right sides together. They're still loose, but they should be right sides together. And I'm just going to clean up my seam here and cut off the extra elastic. But if you didn't quite understand what I just did, I've sewn the right sides together of the main, and then you can take your panty like this, just leave it out flat, and just put the side seams, the lining, right sides together and sew them. And then you're gonna, once they're sewn, then you'll see when you flip it out, it's gonna be all the seams encased. So these little side seams, excuse me, are super hard to sew, so I did have to use paper and just tear it off. As you can see, it looks messy only because I'm using a dark thread. But what you do is you sew those together and then you sew the seam allowance pointing to the back with a straight stitch so it is flat. And now you can see the panties are coming together. And now it's just doing the top elastic. I think she uses fold over elastic. I don't have any fold over elastic, so I'm going to be using picot elastic. I'll show you how I do that. So this is picot elastic, or you can use any kind of elastic actually. The picot elastic is generally lingerie elastic. It has a fancy edge. The first step to do though is we're going to baste with a long stitch length, baste the lining to the main. Just go around the whole top and baste it just with a quick straight stitch. So this is what you should have so far. The top should be basted together. Once you've sewn the fold over elastic or the picot elastic on, you can pop these straight stitches just by pulling, and you do want them to pop so that the panty will stretch properly. Or you can go in with a seam ripper and just every 6th or 8th stitch just unpick. I actually do have some fold over elastic. So I'm going to use the fold over, but what I'm going to do is wrap it around. I'm going to try these panties on to make sure they're what I want. And then where the waist is, I'm going to wrap the fold over elastic around my body and just see what is the most comfortable length for it. So I'm going to go do that. And I should explain fold over elastic. There's a shiny side and a matte side. You can use either side as the right side. And there is a line in the middle, and that's where, of course, it folds. I do find sometimes fold over elastic can get kind of crunchy over time, kind of stiff. So I like to use the soft side as the side against my body. So I'm calling the shiny side the inside and the matte side the right side. So I've put this around my body to figure out exactly how long I wanted it. And now I'm going to sew it on the ends, right sides together, just to make a loop. So sew your ends right sides together. So once you make your loop, you want to sew your ends flat as well. So the elastic is really flat, it's not bulky. So sew the tails down on opposite ends. And when you're applying your fold over elastic, you want the center of the elastic probably at your center back. Don't put it at the front. So there's a couple of ways to sew fold over elastic. The first method, and if you're a beginner, the easiest method, and the method I still use, is I line up my fabric, the edge of my fabric, to the fold of the tape, and I do a zigzag stitch on that all the way around. And then, sorry, I should be doing it the other way. I should be demonstrating this way. So you can sew on the wrong side to the wrong side of the tape, sew that down, and then you're going to fold it over and you're going to sew it down again on top from the right side. So that's definitely the method I would use. I find you have the most control and it's easy. But I'm skipping ahead because what you really need to do is you need to quarter your work. So you know where the halfway points are because that's where the center back and center front seams are. And then find where the side seams are. Remember, it's not going to be the seam here. It's going to be, hold your panty out. It's going to be here, not at the forward side seam. And you're going to do the same thing with the elastic. You're going to quarter it so you know you have a seam here. So that's going to be the half, and these are going to be the quarter points, and you're going to match it up. And once you have all those points marked, you're going to match it and sew your fold over elastic. I actually have already made a bra from this fabric, so I want to use picot elastic to match the bra I made. So if you're using picot elastic, you know what? I tend to not make a loop with it. I tend to just sew it on. So let me find, there's the end. So picot elastic, you sew you put it on the right side and you have the picots facing down. And again, I would start like just on the back. So you're going to sew it, and you're going to sew very, very close, a small, small zigzag right along the edge here, right next to the picots. And again, it's going to be the right side of the panty and the side of the picot elastic that you want on your body, you want that facing up. So whichever side you pick. So I'm going to go ahead and put my picot elastic on the first pass, and I'll show you what it looks like. So you can see I have finished my first pass of the picot elastic, And if you can see up close how close I've sewn to those scallop of the elastic, I haven't gone over, but I haven't sewed, like I've sewed just very close to those. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and cut off this extra fabric to my sew line. So there's not so much bulk under the elastic. So I'm literally just taking my scissors and just trimming it away like that. So we have that sewn to the right side, and now all we're going to do is flip that to the inside, and we're going to do a zigzag stitch on the top. And then your panty should be done once you've zigzagged the top. I did start with a 3-step zigzag, but for the picot elastic, I think it's a little too much. Just a plain zigzag works. And again, there's some waviness in my lining, but that straightens out when it's actually on. And you're all done.